Hello, everybody. Hello. Thank you for joining us this evening. Just giving everyone a couple of seconds to get logged on. And I wanted to welcome you to our King's Expert Series webinar on forced displacement and seeking sanctuary. My name is Katie Raymond and I work with the King's Alumni Relations team. Our team work with partners across the King's community to bring this webinar series to you exclusively, our alumni. The series brings our research and academics to you. So a little bit of housekeeping for this evening. This event will be recorded, so if you have to nip off for any reason, you can catch up later on and share it with your friends. And you have an opportunity to submit your questions to our panelists via the Q&A function. So please do submit those as you think of them. So without delay, I'm really pleased to hand over to your chair for this evening, Leonie. So I will hand over to you, Leonie. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us for this event. I'm very happy to chair. And I'm also absolutely delighted to have three experts with us today, and I will introduce in a little while. So my name is Leonie Anselmse-Vlies, and I'm an academic at King's. I work as a reader in international politics. I'm also the chair of the Migration Research Group, and I'm also the director of the King's Sanctuary Programme. So anything migration and refugee related, come to me, I think is the point here. Right, so yeah, we wanted to do an event really thinking about this global issue of forced displacement that now impacts more than 100 million people worldwide, but also thinking about how does that affect people in the UK. So that's the broader context we're thinking about forced displacement globally, but then specifically thinking about the UK and the hostile environment policies and practices that we see here, and how does this impact people, but also perhaps what are the ways in which we can develop frameworks, policies, practices that may counter that as well. And when we were thinking about this event, and we were thinking, like, who could we invite to speak? There are many fantastic migration scholars at King's, as well as many people who do more practical work around migration and forced displacement. But we're really very, very happy that we have these three people here, and they will introduce themselves a bit more fully as part of the first question I will ask. But we have Francesca Maloney, Guntas Evansons, and Jan Hans Vanatan. And what I'll do, I will be asking them two questions, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of a conversation. And after that, there's time for a Q&A as well. So I want to set this up as in a more conversational style rather than sort of doing presentations. And my first question really is about introduce yourself and say a little bit about this issue of forced displacement. So we'll go on to that now, and I'll ask each of you that question in turn, and you've got 2 minutes to respond to that, and then we'll move on to the next question. So I'd like to start with Francesca, if that is okay. So yeah, if you could just introduce yourself and then explain your interest in the issue of forced displacement.
Yeah. Thank you, Leonie, and thank you, everyone. It's really nice to be here, even if I don't see you. So my name is Francesca Meloni. I'm a lecturer at the School of Education, Communication and Society at King's, and I've been researching and teaching on issues of migration and refugees in Italy, UK, and Canada. And I'm particularly interested in doing some work on the relationship between migration and citizenship, and so how particular groups of people, become labeled as deserving or undeserving citizenship and access to services. So I've been working, for instance, on undocumented groups of people and access to education and healthcare, unaccompanied minors, and failed refugees. So yeah, I'll stop here and give the floor to the other speakers.
Thank you so much. Very succinct introduction. Great. So I'll move on to Guntas. Would you like to introduce yourself as well and speak about your interest in forced displacement?
Yeah, thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm a lecturer at the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine. I'm a social and medical anthropologist by training. And my interest in migration and forced displacement I guess, stems from my own background as an economic migrant who arrived in the UK post-2008 and financial crisis. And I was lucky enough to pursue a master's degree, during which I became interested in migration, ethnic minority status, and mental health. And this in turn, it's a fascinating story. Unfortunately, I don't have time for that now, but it led me to collaborating and working with the Somali community, Somali diaspora in London. So my ethnographic fieldwork was focused on prohibition of a psychoactive substance khat. And while I cannot delve into specifics of the policy process here, I ended up exploring how active moral and political involvement of Somali refugees in this prohibition process, and linking to this prohibition process to issues often categorized under the umbrella of social integration, such as education, employment, living conditions, health, and mental well-being as well. And right now, I am continuing working on with refugees and refugee-related issues, specifically on mental health, and focusing particularly on how refugees live their everyday lives, maybe specifically in urban environments, and how these kinds of contexts are multi-layered and imbricated environments in which people live, ranging from political and policy kind of abstract context down to the granular aspects of everyday life in a city.
Fantastic. That's exactly 2 minutes. I'm very impressed. But great introduction as well. Thanks very much. Move over to Yanahan.
Hear me? Oh, yes. Thanks, Leonie, and thanks everyone for being here and having me here. So my name is Janahan Sivanathan, and I presently work as a Sanctuary Project Officer at King's Sanctuary Program. I must declare that I lost my identity along the way due to forced displacement. However, my forged identity due to survival and adaptation is a torture survivor and a refugee who finally found some certainty and safety after navigating the unknown for 13 years. So I'll be speaking more about my personal experience later, but as an introduction, following my 2 spells of immigration detention in the UK, I learned the hardship people seeking sanctuary go through in depth. That includes suicide as well as self-harm due to the hostile immigration policies. So by transforming the experience of pain and suffering as a motivation to study law, I qualified as an immigration and asylum level 2 senior caseworker. So I use that expertise to help people affected by forced displacement on the front line of their legal battle. Also, I use this as an opportunity to amplify their voices to influence policy across different sectors. So my interest in global issue of forced displacement is that I'm one of the bees in the elephant's ear. So I'm using my lived and learned experience to influence the narrative. That's pretty me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anahan. And yeah, so great to have you on the panel to be able to share that, but also as part of our team as well. We learn from you every day. Right, so let's move over to the second question, and that is sort of, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing forcibly displaced persons in the UK today, and how does your research or your work address this challenge? So I've given everyone 3 minutes, but I think we're doing really good on time, so if you go a bit over 3 minutes, that's absolutely fine. Shall I mix it up a bit and start with Gunter's this time around? So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Leonie. Okay, where to start? I have a written draft answer, and I ended up cutting out things to fit the time frame. But I wanted to start with the broader context and want to highlight a concerning pattern in the UK, but maybe not just UK, and we know not just here, where there seems to be a systematic erosion of the status, agency, and personhood of refugees. And this trend is, of course, closely tied to anti-immigration politics, such as the implementation of the hostile environment policy and the corresponding anti-immigrant rhetoric. As a result, claiming asylum and living a fulfilling life in this socio-political climate is extremely challenging. So a critical challenge, in my view, lies in the restrictions placed on asylum seekers from the very beginning of their settlement. And I don't have a time now maybe to go into details how people arrive here and government schemes when people are settled here, and as opposed to those who are now severely disadvantaged who claim asylum on arrival at the border. But either way, asylum seekers are prohibited from seeking employment or pursuing education, and they are often dispersed and housed in substandard accommodations located in disadvantaged areas. So political climate of rejection directly shapes the social and material environments in which people attempt to rebuild their lives. The disempowerment experienced by asylum seekers does not cease upon receiving leave to remain or refugee status. So many refugees continue to face social and economic insecurity, enduring unfavorable and unpredictable circumstances that foster existential uncertainty in their lives. And these conditions have detrimental effects on their mental health. I have met individuals who possess creativity, qualifications, and a strong desire to work, participate, and contribute to their host society, but their efforts to establish themselves are exhausting. And this exhaustion can lead to depression, constant worries, anxiety, and in some cases, substance use disorders. And therefore, it is critically important, in my view, to enable refugees to have the ability to contribute to society, thereby fostering their well-being and integration. And this is where my work focuses, with a specific emphasis on the mental health implications of the living environment, particularly in urban context, as most refugees in the UK and increasingly worldwide reside in the cities. While it is widely recognized that experiences of war, conflict, and violence have long-term mental health effects, post-migration factors, as they are called, also significantly impact the well-being of refugees. And so these factors include racism, discrimination, isolation, limited access to employment or underemployment when people who are well qualified have to work well below their qualification levels, education, poverty, and poor living conditions. So unfortunately, the current portrayal of forcibly displaced individuals as homogeneous mass and passive recipients of handouts further complicates efforts to address these challenges effectively. So addressing these issues, of course, requires work at multiple levels, from policy making to the understanding of everyday experience of refugees. And ideally, individuals who have escaped persecution, violence, and adversity would be met with a welcoming and nurturing environment upon arrival at their destination. And we should understand, I think, and that it's a hard message to get across, that placing people in disempowering and disabling environments will not yield positive outcomes for anyone in the broader society. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. There's so much to follow up on that already, but I will not. But especially really interesting we say about exhaustion, because this is also the topic of my research. But also, I think sort of enabling people to contribute, I think, is something maybe we can speak about a bit more later. You know, to kind of counter that disempowerment, because I think that's a really important issue as well. If you're happy with that, Francesca, I'll move over to you now, because I think that some of what Guntas has said, and what you probably said, Janahan can contextualize, I think, with some of the sort of lived experience as well. So if you're happy with that, I'll move to you now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I was actually thinking, so one of the challenges is really this anti-migrant rhetoric and the crisis of protection. And maybe to add a little bit on that, you know, that also depends on the way that the stories framed and the way that people are named, and really thinking about our own very the question that we are asked, right, about forcibly displaced people. You know, when people come here to the UK, they need to prove to this integrate an asylum system that they are forcibly displaced, and so that they are not voluntary displaced and economic migrants. And the way that you need to prove it, you know, depends very much on the external circumstances and the countries that they are from, geopolitical interests that, you know, the UK, as for instance, as with this country, the gender, how wages assessed, etc. And I think, you know, in relation also to the UK, before even coming here, people are labeled as, you know, illegal because they have no legal means to reach safety. And so that, and now they are also, you know, really removed away from society and, you know, in detention center, Rwanda, etc. And so we really need to, to talk about how to create really these legal pathways to safety as well, and the ways that, you know, the policies and politics label people before coming here even. And so I was thinking, like, in this context where we do live in our everyday lives, and it's about three, I guess, you know, three things that they are, you know, three ways I'm trying to do in my work and research and teaching, that there are, you know, three ways to push a little bit against the limits of this kind of, you know, climate of hostility and climate of violence. And one, I guess, you know, is how but I guess are more questions than, you know, like concrete facts. But one is really like how we can create, you know, different spaces and different stories, right? That there are alternatives to that narrative. And I think one of the things when, you know, people do research and we do research is that unintentionally that can reproduce, you know, the violence of the asylum system, for instance, in the way that, you know, researchers collect the data and ask these questions in spaces that could feel unsafe or, you know, completely useless. And so I think for me, that really starts from, you know, the way, the kind of questions we ask in research, the way we collaborate with people, but also, you know, having also a slower pace where, you know, you connect with people and you listen and you challenge also some of these assumptions. Or I guess, yeah, like I come to think about it, it's like really a space of openness and uncertainty, right? Where you don't really know the answers yet. And then the second thing is really, you know, to also, you know, the ways that we can act and collaborate outside academia with different stakeholders and involving institutions and community organizations. And for instance, one experience that has really, you know, taught me a great deal is the co-establishment and working in a working group on access to education for undocumented children in Canada. And then the third thing that I was thinking is really like how, you know, we need also to start from our very own position and the very own institutions we work in, right? And so when we are talking, for instance, about the hostile environment, like it creeps in our everyday lives. And, you know, and as teachers, we are asked to collect data and act as border guards, and then administration team sends these threatening emails to students, etc. And then also on the other way, you know, we can create, you know, other kind of initiatives and activities and issues of access to education, you know, that are very much present. And they are very much barriers for people. And so I'll put it there, but also as a kind of a way to say that I'm also grateful that there is this space to, I guess, you know, discuss together, right, as part of and to create, you know, a different way, a different space within the same community or the same institution.
Great, thank you so much. I think really important points there as well. And really also thinking about that hostile environment, and just maybe just a very quick clarifying note, and I know Jan-Han, you will speak about this as well, but when we speak about the hostile environment, that in the UK context, that means that a lot more people get engaged in creating that hostility. So it's not just the formal border guards, but it was also in education that we need to start checking documentation in healthcare. So landlords and so on, right? And so did that mean that kind of the government was almost kind of outsourcing that work, and we all need to be suspicious of people that are so-called illegal? And I think so that's what Francesca is talking about here, and I know Janahan will speak about that as well. So I'll pass over to you now.
Thanks, Leonie. So yeah, I'm gonna share my personal experience as a sample connecting to all the difficult things that have been shared already. So my story is a sample, one in million stories in the UK and also around the world. And what I hope to achieve is I hope to help you walk in my shoes for a few minutes to see the challenges created by the hostile environment policies and their impact. So to begin with, in 2010, I entered the UK as a 17-year-old torture survivor from Sri Lanka. I was not able to speak a word of English at that time. In 2011, due to post-traumatic stress and secondary depression following my ill treatment in Sri Lanka, combined with isolation in the UK, I attempted suicide and was admitted in critical care. In 2012, I was homeless as an asylum seeker, and I ended up sleeping at bus stops at nights because under the hostile environment policies, as everyone shared before, homeowners are required to perform border officer duties, such as checking immigration status, etc. 2013, as an asylum seeker, I was not allowed to work, but I was forced to survive on my own. So the desperation to survive forced me into the hands of exploitation in the unregulated labor market. I was paid £20 for 56 hours of work per week and a spot to sleep in the wine cellar at restaurants. So the hostile environment policies imposed fine and imprisonment for employers for employing people without any immigration status or right to work. As a result of the policy and desperation, people seeking sanctuary were forced into an unregulated, exploitative labor market. In 2014, I was detained by the Home Office for 5 months. I had kidney malfunction while I was in detention, and I was also issued with a couple of deportation orders in 2014. In 2015, I was detained again by the Home Office and several deportation orders once again. Just so that you're aware, the UK is the only country that detains asylum seekers indefinitely in immigration centers, and this is a heavily used process in the governance to break vulnerable people. In 2016, hostile environment policies created so many barriers to getting help. And in 2016, I attempted suicide following spending months homeless and in limbo. Asylum seekers do not have an automatic right to study. The hostile environment policies impose bans on people's right to study. Sometimes, like for me to start with, I had to fight the right to study. So in 2017, I attempted to try and rebuild my life by trying to get an opportunity to study. However, as very prevalent, I was rejected for not having formal English qualification. But I didn't stop my fight. I kept on fighting, but I was successful later in the year in obtaining a sanctuary scholarship. A place at a university was the first place I felt where I belonged, and it gave me hope and a sense of purpose in life. In 2018, I was recognized as a refugee, and I won the best essay of the year in a language I was told I did not have the qualifications to study in. In 2020, I won second place at the national level legal mind essay competition, and I was awarded the prize for best contribution to the School of Law. 2021, I graduated with a 2-1 in law with human rights. So just to say, as a first generation refugee, having no family and no one to turn to meant being in survival mode all the time. So grabbing any opportunities available to make a sustainable living and to make sure that I do not lose the opportunity given in the higher education sector to thrive. However, in 2022, as I mentioned, being a first generation refugee, I was unable to cope with progressing further in my career to become a lawyer. Even though I got accredited as an immigration and asylum level 2 caseworker, the cost of living challenges and lost years as an asylum seeker in limbo, I had to proactively change my purpose and lose the career I aspired to grow in. So in 2013, I am here pursuing a goal of breaking barriers for the people who to thrive. Having said that, sorry if I'm running over time, just a couple more lines. Having said that, my present mission is not a single straw pulling act, but it is a collective purpose with collaborative action. Without working together, it is hard to build a bridge. I must mention my present motivation. The team I presently work with is a team with a mission, passion, and compassion. And my absolute final words, having traveled through the lived experience forums, one question that always echoes in my mind and many others is how many stories would it take to make us think a little differently and also compassionately to make the change happen? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yanahan. We really appreciate you sharing your personal experience there. And it's sort of hugely insightful, and I think also really links very well with what the others have said. And yeah, it'd be good sort of in a minute ask if the three of you have questions for one another as well. But also just, yeah, I think that point around the tension, I think is a really important one, because it's a key aspect of that hostile environment. And these are people that are often have not committed any crimes, right? And I think that's really important to highlight, and can be detained indefinitely, and that means you never know when you're going to get out, and often also it's an administrative detention, right, for administrative purposes rather than anything else. So that's usually, especially for people that are already very, very vulnerable, is hugely problematic. And I think one thing that sort of also came to the fore in sort of the other presentation, I think it's also sort of important just to kind of sketch that a little bit. So what's happening in the UK, especially now with the sort of the new legislation that's being pushed through, is that a distinction is being made between people that arrive here so-called regularly, right? So that's through a settlement route or sort of a visa route, who get a slightly better treatment, and people that arrive so-called irregularly, right, who are, that's that's the story that Yanahan has been speaking about, but also, of course, there's plans to send people to Rwanda and so on. Now, quite often, there's very little difference between these groups of people in terms of who they are, in terms of where they flee from, and so on. The difference between them is that some have been able to travel irregularly, and for others, the borders have been closed and they have not been able to do so. And if you're unlucky one, then you kind of face that hostile environment in a much more forceful way than otherwise. But I think, importantly, what Gunther said as well, even people whose status has been regularized, so for instance, who have refugee status, quite often means that it doesn't mean that everything is fine, that it's still a lot of challenges. And again, I think also, Yanahan, you've spoken to that as well. So I think that's also important to think about that. So yeah, thanks to the three of you for kind of really illustrating that really well. Yeah, do you have anything you want to follow up on? Any questions for the others? Francesca, do you want to come in there?
No, not really. No. Sorry.
Yanahan, maybe I can turn to you if you're happy with that. If you, given what you have experienced, if there is sort of one change we could make, we're sitting here, we're the policymakers, or you have direct access to the UK government, and there's kind of one policy change we could make, or just even sort of a more practical point. I know there's a lot that could be done, but yeah, what would that be in terms of pushing back against the hostile environment, but also sort of changing that lived experience, that hostility?
That's a really big question, and I have an answer that I could go on for a couple of months to answer that. So there are two things, which is like the people wants to thrive, and also the main issue is like people actually trying to find safety and certainty. So the most important thing is to provide access, a really good access for people to find certainty through safety. That will let people thrive. And on the other aspect, there's also limbo-ness, which feeds into so many different things, such as the people who have witnessed through, who have attempted suicide, as well as myself, the limbo-ness while being in the asylum system, and not getting treated even like a human being. A lot of judgments around who claim asylum, how they claim, or the behind the forced migration. If that is all eliminated and let people let the government treat the people as seeking sanctuary and enable them to provide, like, express themselves on what they need, that will like solve the first issue of like getting where they need to, whether studies, whether finding that place of belonging. And the bigger aspect is allow right to work on the other hand, because that will solve so many different things. But again, there's so many things. Sorry, I'm just all over the place because it's quite long.
That's really important. There's the issue around limbo and uncertainty, and being able to make that contribution. And you're right. So many people actually they want to stay active. They want to do things if they can. And I think that relates to something that Gunther spoke about as well. So Gunther, I don't know if you want to come in here as well and speak a bit more about that issue of sort of being able to contribute or sort of, and not just contributing, right? Because that sounds like you're only deserving if you contribute, but it is more around being able to be part of society, right? And being included, actively included in that society.
Certainly. I mean, and Janahan already articulated it brilliantly, that this ability to give, to contribute, to have around these possibilities and access to things like employment, education. It's not just in kind of material market terms, or somebody will be employed. We must understand that employment means connections with people, developing networks, integrating in with the surroundings. So and it gives that certainty and familiarity with the place, with the living environment, because I think a lot of relating to that point I mentioned about exhaustion is lack of predictability and familiarity down to the very concrete things like overcrowded living conditions, lack of employment, people live in shared accommodations for years and such, and we are talking about people who already have gone through multiple hardships. So how that would not break anyone. And from research we know that being forced to move, for example, your house is undermining, because people get used to what very often is referred to local area. People like to belong, to start to become familiar with their surroundings. They make connections with neighbors, and although populist politicians would say that they speak on behalf of people who don't want certain people here, it's not true. What we know from research, that very often neighbors are very supportive. There are warm neighborly connections that forcibly displaced people, refugees, develop with their neighbors. So and that is the familiarity, that is the sense of belonging to the local area, to the society. And yeah, I think I'll stop there, but yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, I think that's really, it's around inclusion, belonging, and so on, and that can be created in various ways. And employment is one way. Education is also a one, but sometimes it's just the very basic local connections, right, that are really important there. Francesca, I mean, some of what you said also, especially sort of around the labeling, probably relates to this as well. So I don't know if you want to speak a bit more about that. And I think also what is so really important point you made about how, especially when you go through that asylum system, it's always based on suspicion, right, of not believing you, and you're having to prove that actually you do have a claim to make, you do belong in some way. So it'd be great if you wanted to elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it is a tricky thing, these things about labels, right? And then how people become attached to it. I guess, on the one hand, I mean, one of the things is that you exist in a society through being labeled, right? And so absolutely, like, it does matter. For instance, whether you're an asylum seeker, whether you're labeled as, illegal, or, you come through an irregular pathway, etc. but I think, there is, I'm thinking there is also a kind of a danger in, in labeling, for instance, people as refugees. When do you stop being a migrant and when do you stop being a refugee? Or when, for instance, you need to speak, always after getting the, your status about that same story. And for instance, I've been doing some collaborative work with some former unaccompanied minors who come to the UK. And in a sense, sometimes, the way that we collaborate, people can also bear the danger of, assuming that that's your identity or that's a story that you will talk to. And that's your expertise just because of that difference. And that could also be, a burden on people. So I think, it is, and because also that way of labeling, carries again, like, a stigma. But so I think it is, it is not easy, right? Because recognition and inclusion often sometimes happens in these terms, right? And I think there is also a comfort of not being exposed, right? And not being and becoming, anonymous as well. There is a kind of a protection. So I think, just wanted to put it there because it's always also something that, can be a burden for people as well,
Thank you so much. And I think that's such an important point because I think it's, especially at a certain stage, people just want to be like everyone else, right? So always then to have that label could actually also be restrictive. So really important point there as well. Right, let's move to the Q&A. We've got a few questions coming already, which is great. So if anyone else wants to ask another question, just put it in the Q&A, not in the chat, but in the Q&A. So we've got sort of two open questions here. That we'll start with the first one and I'll go to the second one. And the first one, I think I would just say anyone in the panel who knows about this would like to respond, please do. The second question, I think, is to all of them. So the first question is from Anna, and that's the effects of migration and seeking sanctuary on feminine health, including menstruation, pregnancy, birthing complications, recovery, is an emerging area of research. How are UK hospitals, GPs, etc., responding to feminine health needs for those who have just lived through forced displacement? I'm wondering whether, Francesca, would you be able to answer that? Is that within your area of research?
Yeah. So I think I guess two things come to mind. I mean, in terms of the issues, some of the issues are certainly about health coverage, right? So if you don't have your status, and if you're undocumented or you're failed asylum seekers, then you won't have a coverage, and like for if you're pregnant, but for anything else. And I know at the levels of like GPs and organizations, there are some there have been some movements of doctors and organizations pushing or claiming, for a wider access. So for instance, there are GPs that they are part of a network and they don't ask for a proof of address or, your documents, right? Because it's also, that part of that hostile environment policy, right? When you get registered to a GP or you go to ask to be treated in a hospital, you're asked for a proof of address. And that's a new thing and a new regulation that comes with these hostile environment policies. And so, the person who needs to treat you is actually effectively acting as a border guard. And so, for instance, there is doctors of the world within community organizations who are also doing a lot of work on that. And then the other issues that there's been also a lot of work on, like the disparity in health outcomes especially for Black people or racialized people. So whether you're refugees or not, there is a lot of that institutional racism in hospitals as well. So these are like some of the things that come to mind. I don't know if other people want to add on that.
Thank you. I think that's very comprehensive, and also, yeah, important to mention that sort of that intersectionality of things, whether it's part of your legal status, it could be ethnicity, gender, and so on, right? And that could make things even more complicated, as well as just a fear, even sometimes when services are available. Like, for instance, especially when it comes to pregnancy, people should have access to free care. But often people are just very afraid because of the interlinkages between the NHS and the Home Office. They are afraid that they're still going to be picked up and deported, which you can understand in that broader hostile environment. So I think that's a huge issue there as well. But Guntas or Janahan, I don't know if you want to add to Francesca's answer there. Nope. Okay, in that case, we'll go to the next question. So I think this is for all of you, and I think it's a great question as well. So does the panel think a potential change in government in 2014 will make significant difference to the hostile environment and attitudes to asylum seekers and refugees more generally? It's a big one, and it's a funny one because I think I've spoken at least twice about this in various meetings today. So it's something that I think is spoken about quite a bit at the moment. Janahan, do you want to kick off, and then we can get to Guntas and then Francesca?
Sure. I'll try not to go too political. I'm just going to be in the middle to say the policies, having working policies and humane policies, the humane approach that everyone talks about, being human. So having policies towards being more human will work, whether change of government or not change of government, or who do we have, that will work. So, and at the same time, stop using refugees and asylum seekers or migration as a goal scoring point. So if we move away completely from that, we will have a working policy and things, to my belief and hope, and or maybe I'm just dreaming. That's my answer.
Great, thank you very much. Guntas?
Yeah, I'm afraid we can only speculate, but I think it as well, just to continue from what Janahan said about, this easy populist go-to and pitting against very often already disempowered, disenfranchised, most disempowered, disenfranchised people in society against each other. But whether that will change is, I think it depends on a broader political processes and currents. It depends in what interest the new government will work. So if the new government will work in the interest of the nation, the state, the people, which they say to represent, and not corporate power, etc., which is one of the significant, in my view, the actors which requires this direction of attention away from the processes which make many people poorer, more disempowered. So if there will be this big sea change in the dedication of government and political will and political courage to really allow people to thrive and not corporations to thrive, then I think it is possible that it will change. However, this is a very dangerous time, I must add as well, because once these flames have been kind of enticed, they take time to go out again. So I'm afraid populists not always understand what kind of fire they are playing with, in my view.
Thank you. I think it's a really important point as well. Absolutely. Francesca?
Yeah, maybe just to add, I mean, yeah, we can always hope for a better change, but I think to stress, I think it's also that this hostile environment policy did not come just suddenly one day. They really are connected through colonialism and through really an erosion of the like the right to asylum since the 80s. So if we look at the, for instance, the history of Europe, like the right for asylum to non-European, it was really, really brief in time. So I think we're really like looking at a context that, the right to protection is really, really precarious and really, and then I think also like across the political spectrum, like still there is, always that kind of rhetoric that migration is a problem to be managed. And, in other countries, for instance, Obama, it did pass, some progressive laws, for instance, for regularization for undocumented people. But for instance, it has the highest rates of deportation than for instance, the other government. So I think, it is still something that is considered like very thorny and heated and still a problem across different sides of the political spectrum.
Right, thank you so much. I think, both of those are really important points. On the one hand, this much longer legacy that has led to where we are now. And yes, there's a long history of colonialism and imperialism as part of that. But also think about the last Labour government. I know it's been a while, but the immigration detention we're speaking about, that was under them, right? So some of the policies that are now called hostile environment actually started earlier, right? So I think it's important to hold the current government to account for what they've done, but at the same time also acknowledging that, as Francesca, it didn't come out of nowhere as well. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. But also sort of at the same time, on the other hand, actually, it is quite precarious. It's not that long ago. Like it's only since 1951 that we started speaking about sort of, the refugees and the right to protection and so on. And for that to become a universal right, that's 1967. That's not actually that long ago. So these things can change quite rapidly, and especially if you've spoken about earlier already in this kind of very populist times as well, and of much more general upheaval as well, both in the UK and globally. So I think it's very important to keep all that in mind. Right, we'll go to the next question. Annie, thank you very much for asking that question. So I'm just going to scroll down to the question you actually asked. Beyond this webinar, there are unspoken political, communal, financial and health challenges. What would you say are the deep-rooted societal obstacles to even the smallest political communal solutions that have been proposed by now? Is it collective negligence, racism, etc., or is it something more or less complex? And have any actions been taken to directly or indirectly address and help society progress away from those obstacles? That's a really important question, and also a very difficult one and a very big one. But I don't know, any one of you want to respond to part of that question, or part of that answer, or the whole answer? You can see in the Q&A if you want to sort of read through it again. But really thinking about solutions and what are the obstacles to solutions, because I think you're right, Annie, solutions have been proposed and continue to be proposed. And why is it so difficult to implement those? Yeah, I guess part of the question.
I don't know. I can just start on this. I think some of the issues that there are also historical issues is certainly very a history of racism and then bordering, but that is not just in the UK, it's really across the globe. I think it's also important to know that at the level of, for instance, local levels, or at the level of the city, or some of the cities, there have been also different initiatives, because otherwise we just have a very bleak picture of how is actually the world. And so for instance, I'm thinking about that there is the sanctuary scholarship, but for instance, there are sanctuary cities that they have opposed actually racist and restrictive policies and opened access to healthcare or education, so don't tell policy where you don't ask for documents for people, and yeah, or different pathways or legal pathways to safety, or yeah, like micro initiatives that they are maybe like, you know, more welcoming for people. So I think it's important also to look at those spaces, you know, for, you know, spaces of change, of political action, or, you know, for to imagine things in a different way.
Thank you so much. So we've got Helen here as well, who's joining us directly from nursery. Johanna Günthers, did you want to add to that as well?
I think then just to maybe continue from Francesca, what already brought up, is that there is this, and this is kind of peculiar within kind of capitalist market thinking, that that resources, like you know, in growing economies, that everything is limited, that if people are being allowed to participate, they somehow will take up a finite amount of space within employment, within education, within healthcare, whereas the market logic usually suggests that the economy should grow and expand, and economists will know better. I think it's a certain fallacy in thinking that migrants kind of come here and take our jobs, as it is colloquially usually expressed, which is not the case. We know from evidence that migrant labor actually contributes to society. It creates jobs, etc. And particularly from my experience, my research, I met people for example, in Bristol, where there is a refugee community, and what we can call local economies. And these local economies are transforming, which until recently have been deprived areas in the city. One of the most deprived areas, according to some statistics at the UK at the state level, are transforming these neighborhoods for the better, because they open cafes, they open shops, they employ people, they cater to each other, they cater to wider society, etc., etc. So I think that is one of the ingrained kind of and we can see how in anti-immigrant rhetoric it's being used again and again, that people are coming here and taking something away which is somehow limited, whereas it might be limited, but it's an artificial creation of a limit in the first place. So I think addressing that is allowing people, as already been discussed, to participate, to thrive. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Johan, do you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, sure. So I was thinking about as well about questioning how do we play part in the hostile environment policy, as we have discussed throughout. Like we play, like if we work in a hospital or if you work in a so and so places, we might play a part in actually implementing those policies. So I'm just gonna bring in the COVID protective measure about 2 meter distance. Question yourself, what part or where do you stand in those policies? Distance yourself. Without participation of wider people, that policies cannot function. The one strongest example is, like, I even watched the video this morning. There's a collective action to stop an immigration raid in Glasgow a couple of years ago. So they took the man in the van, but when the neighborhood came together, they had to drop him off. Things will work, and like I said, distance and question yourself on what is your contribution towards this policy and how are you playing your part, and making that conscious decision to challenge the way we continue to process things unconsciously. But when we start challenging those, the collective movement will create on its own. So that's my contribution on that.
Right. I think it's also a really important point. And so often, I think, especially people that are not migrants or like me, a very privileged migrant. Yeah, okay. Okay. So we may not see those borders and boundaries that other people experience, and sometimes we are part of that border policy and we are the border guards, but we don't even realize that we are. And it's sometimes it's also kind of doing a bit more reflection about actually what is happening around me and what am I part of. And I think that's really important, because so often it is kind of invisible in terms of what we do. So that's really important as well. And I think one of the questions, I guess this would probably be Gunther who can respond to that. So one of the processes asylum seekers and migrants have to go through includes psychological assessments by expert witnesses. The cost of this is expensive and often unaffordable. What can psychologists and similar professionals do to ensure they're not contributing to the detrimental impact of the hostile environment policy?
Well, it's difficult to say what they can do. I mean, that would be, we could ask them, doctors and psychologists, to not contribute, maybe just not participate in these kinds of processes, as Jan just said. But it is, we know as well that the part of these evaluations and certifications and evaluations of PTSD and trauma, it becomes almost a kind of an industry of itself, maybe not based on strictly monetary terms, but like something similar to a conveyor belt, so to say, which actually has very little to do in really understanding people's background experience of suffering and their mental health state, but quite a bureaucratic process of evaluating how somebody fits or doesn't fit the very, again, sort of very standard profile of what we would consider a traumatized individual and deserving, therefore, of acceptance and certain kind of services. So that's a good question. Very complicated area. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll move over to the final question. We've got 2 minutes. Yeah, if you have a brief, it's a difficult one. If you have a brief answer to that, that would be great. So which countries have been able to find better solutions to these challenges and better outcomes for the most vulnerable than the UK has? Anyone want to comment on there? Any examples in other countries where this is organized a bit better? I know you're all from different countries, so I don't know whether you have examples from there or from elsewhere.
I think countries have different approaches to, I think some Northern European, Scandinavian countries they still have as well quite hostile policies, but I think at least they fare better in terms of offering asylum seekers and refugees what we could call pathways to social integration, such as education and pathways into employment. It's way more regulated. In the UK, which is a very little known fact, is that after somebody transitions from asylum seeker to refugee, so basically once asylum seeker receives a refugee status, you have 28-day period in which you must sort yourself out. Basically, you transition from asylum welfare to general welfare system, and after 28 days, your asylum support finishes, and by then either you are on a welfare support or you must find employment, etc. So in comparison, Denmark, Netherlands, etc., they are way more hands-on and engaged in actually helping asylum seekers and refugees to transition into their new settings, new living conditions.
Great, thank you so much. I don't know, Jan, Francesca, if you have a 10-second answer that you want to add to that, you're very welcome.
Yeah, Maybe I'll add just the examples of, sanctuary cities and don't ask, don't tell policies. So for instance, in Canada, Toronto, and there is San Francisco in the US. So that could be one good examples at the level of cities.
Yeah, great example as well. Yanhan?
In comparison, like if you weigh a country's power and its resources and how they support or treat the refugees, I would say UK is the worst in comparison to other countries, but the way they treat refugees. Like Kanta said, there are policies that recognize and provide access to social integration, which is completely lacking in the UK. It's more like people are on survival mode all the time when you're in that phase as an asylum seeker or even a refugee. So yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your presentations or for the discussions and all your answers as well. So I'm going to hand back now for the final words.
Thank you. Firstly, I want to say a huge thank you for our panel this evening, delivering such a thought-provoking discussion. On behalf of the Alumni Office, thank you all for attending our webinar. Further information about today's topic will be shared in a follow-up, and the recording will be available online for you to rewatch. We always want to hear your feedback, so please do complete our short survey following the end of this session, and we really hope to see you again soon. Good evening and thank you, everybody.